Good evening. I'm Hector Gunther, Chair of the Town of Barnstable Comprehensive Financial Advisory Committee. Today is our semi-weekly March 24th, 2025 meeting of the full committee. We meet every other week during 10 months of the year, except for July and August, when we only meet once. Under state law, I have to inquire if anyone is taping this meeting, if so, to make him or herself known. And if not, Chris Lauzon, can you call the roll, please?
Yes, Hector.
Yes.
Chuck is not here. Lillian.
You here?
Jim.
Present.
Tom.
Present.
Jeremy.
Present.
Chris King.
I'm here.
And I'm here.
Great. So we have a full quorum. I want to ask if there's any members of the public who wish to comment. Seeing none. The next agenda item is to approve the March 10th, 2025 minutes. Do I have a motion to accept them?
So moved. Second.
Great. Any comments on the minutes?
They look good.
Hearing none. Chris, would you call the roll, please?
Hector.
Yes.
Lillian.
I wasn't here, so I'll abstain.
Okay. Jim.
Yes.
Tom.
Yes.
Jeremy.
Yes.
Chris King.
Yes.
And I'm a yes, so the motion passes.
Great. So the minutes of March 10th are approved. Next item on the agenda, number 4, we are welcoming back and honored to have Superintendent Sarah Ahern and Chris Dwelly from the school administration. And Sarah and Chris, you're slated to present the proposed fiscal 2026 school department operating budget. So over to the two of you. Please proceed.
Great, thank you so much. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yep, perfect. Thank you for having us. We're going to present the superintendent's recommended budget for FY26. The school committee will be voting on it on April 2nd, which is next week. And I will share my screen. And I will put this in slideshow mode. Okay, so this is the recommended operating budget. Can you see it okay?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Yes.
looks good.
Okay, it is the same presentation that was given last week at the school committee's budget hearing, but I did update this cover slide to indicate this meeting and today's date. The budget has been in development since December, but even going back to October with the joint presentation to the joint meeting of the school committee and the town council that Mark Milne does. Most recently, we had the public hearing on March 19th after a couple of presentations to the school committee, one being at the beginning of February, followed by a workshop on February, actually it was February 11th, and then a meeting on March 5th. So we come into this budget with a lot of context. It was an incredibly difficult budget to put together. There are a lot of budgeting challenges facing school districts. And it is not Barnstable alone that is faced with some budgeting challenges as it relates to schools. We are seeing this across the state, and some districts are facing FY25 shortfalls. We are not facing a shortfall in the current year, but it just goes to show how challenging it is for districts across the state to come forward with balanced budgets. And the reason for this is it's really a perfect storm that's been happening over the past couple of years, as outlined in a position paper from the Superintendent's Association and the School Committees Association. The first thing that districts are faced with is a fiscal cliff with the expiration of elementary and secondary education relief funding that came to us through the pandemic. We are experiencing escalating expenses, particularly due to inflationary pressures. Chapter 70, which is the state aid to schools, has not been keeping up with inflation. There has been a cap on Chapter 70 below the actual inflation rate. Barnstable's experiencing an enrollment decrease. We went from receiving several $1 million in Student Opportunity Act funding, that's Chapter 70 funding that was elevated as a result of the Student Opportunity Act legislation. We flipped to a minimum aid community in 1 year. So instead of seeing a sustained support for students with special needs, English language learners, low income students, we are now receiving the minimum increase per pupil year over year. We are seeing circuit breaker not always reimbursed to the point that it should be from a statutory standpoint. And then local revenue is not increasing enough to make up the difference. One of the challenges that we faced coming into the budget, there's no slide on this, but previous presentations to the school committee highlighted some of the pressures. We're really pleased, I think, from a recruitment standpoint, that we've gone from a 60-40 healthcare split to a 70-30 healthcare split. But that did create some pressures on some of our grants because we pay health costs out of our grants. And so that made less grant money available to the school department. And we had to do some shifting around into the operating budget. So there's a lot of moving parts here, bringing us into a really tricky situation to bring forward a balanced budget, which we have done. This is not a one-year problem. I have been talking with our elected officials, including Julian Sear, who I met with last year, to highlight some of the challenges. And there's a lot happening with these professional organizations to call on state officials to provide and really make sure that they're looking at making sure there's adequate funding to remedy structural deficits in district budgets. And your presentation that has been shared with you has some background reading if you're interested to find out a little bit more about what's happening for us and also statewide. So it was a challenging budget year. We are presenting a balanced budget to you and doing our best to support the goals of our district improvement plan, particularly in the areas of curriculum and instruction. I had hoped to do more with facilities and maintenance and operating costs, but we are pretty much level service there going into next year. We still have a diverse set of student needs to attend to. We are really trying to make sure that across all of our schools, we're equitably allocating our resources, doing our due diligence to make sure that we're both efficient and effective. We are looking at class sizes and caseloads. I think we want to maintain class sizes and caseloads that are reasonable. And we don't want to push the class sizes up too high because we have school choice competition. And we know that families are looking to send their children to places where you have reasonable class sizes. But we also want to make sure that we're operating in a fiscally responsible way. Sustainability-wise, we do have some concerns related to the sustainability of the current situation. We estimate that we need a 5% increase for level service. We are bringing forward a budget that is 4.75% of an increase, but it's heavily relying on some savings money to offset it. And so I'm concerned about our long-term sustainability. Particularly with preserving programs. So you will hear about some budget reallocations and you'll hear about some budget reductions. We have not gotten to the point of having to reduce any programs, but we are beginning to talk about the pressures causing reductions in services. We have 18 cost centers, and they submitted their requests. They did also point out certain offsets or reductions that might be possible. This is far fewer than we've had in years past, looking for investments of an additional $5.2 million and 20 positions. Major submission themes included contracted services, supplies, and one-time efforts, support for English language learners and special education teachers. But given the fiscal reality that we're facing, most of these requests are not going fulfilled, and we are really focusing on the things that we have to do by state law as we consider building our budget. Chris, I'm going to turn this one over to you.
Okay, here's a high-level summary of the proposed FY26 budget compared to the FY25 budget that was passed. A couple of quick things that I'd just note. Sarah summarized and led into the presentation. We received our revenue estimates at the beginning of the year to start building the budget. We were all said about $2 million in deficit. So this budget represents $2 million in reductions and cuts that will go into a little bit more detail later on in this presentation. Two other things that I want to point out, especially if you're looking at the year-over-year FY25 versus FY26 comparison, you'll see some larger percent increases, particularly on our supply line, which is the second row there, as well as our operating contracted services line. We have included a few one-time projects that we would like to accomplish next year, and we have targeted savings to fund those. So that's those larger than average spikes that you see there are not recurring, and they're one time and will be funded through savings. But here's the general detail of our main expense categories, as well as a breakdown between the town appropriation for the levy and then the amount of savings that we're going to be using this year. I'm good, Sarah. Here's a summary of just some of our core budget drivers that we always look to. So we've got our revenue share allocation here, which is 3.4% year over year. Our revolving fund offset, we have 3 revolving funds that we use to support the operating budget: circuit breaker revolving fund, the transportation revolving fund, and the school choice revolving fund. You see a reduction this year. It's just because last year we increased the contributions from those revolving funds in order to balance the FY25 budget. So we wanted to bring those revolving fund offsets back to historical levels, which is why you'll see the year-over-year reduction there. And then you see our year-over-year and some of our other major categories: salary and wages, our special education increase, which in particular is our out-of-district placements, as well as our out-of-district transportation costs. And then we've broken down all of our savings support that's being used in this operating budget for FY26. So last year we came to the town with a plan to absorb some ESSER positions and use a 4-year savings approach, where the first year we would pay 100% of those costs with savings, and then the last year of the 4 years we would pay 25% of that savings. So this year we've got $1.9 million targeted, and that represents 75% of the total cost. Next year that'll be 50%. The second line on savings account support is a new line for us this year, but it's not a new line for the school district or for the town. And this is just general recurring savings support. This is primarily driven by our vacancy savings and then the associated health insurance costs that we receive as free cash the following year. So the idea is that we kind of continue to use that amount each year to support the operating budget. And this was a practice that was in place right around when COVID hit and had been used from what I've seen every year. And then lastly is our one-time purchases that I mentioned on the previous slide. And those are just under $1 million. And here's a breakdown of the funding sources. So our general fund, appropriation from the town, the 3 revolving fund offsets that I had mentioned, as well as our savings account amount. And you've got a historical perspective here as well.
So we typically start with a level service budget, and then we think about what we need to add in the coming year. As Chris had noted, we have increases expected to add out of district tuition. We have very selectively identified some contracted services for special education, which may create some efficiencies going forward, or is ongoing support that's going to improve a program. The Q interactive assessment and DocuSign may have some efficiencies going forward in the reduction of paper-based assessments, as well as paper going out for signatures, so less postage. We have very high caseloads of special education at West Villages, so we're proposing to add a teacher there. BUE has a larger incoming grade 4 class than the 5th graders who are leaving, and so we anticipate the enrollment at BUE to be larger. And contractually, we need to maintain class sizes at a certain level, so we're proposing 2 classroom teachers for the Barnstable United School. We have a number of English language learners attending our ACE program, which is our high school's alternative learning program that is an afternoon and evening school. That is going very, very well, and we do need to provide them with English language development coursework. We have a specialized program through the New England Center for Children for students with autism. And we have the need for 3 instructional assistants in order to maintain appropriate staffing ratios, given an increased number of students attending there. The NEC program is a wonderful program, and many of these students would not be in the district. They would be placed out of the district if we didn't run our own cohort. So it is just wonderful to have students remain in their hometown for their education, but it's also financially wise. We need to maintain services for our phones, and so we will be upgrading, along with the town, the voice over IP phone system. And then in technology, we have a need to make sure that we're keeping up with our leases so that the staff have the laptops and the Chromebooks that they need. And then our cybersecurity insurance carrier is requiring us to move towards multi-factor authentication. And so we have about $12,000 in the budget for key fobs that will allow staff to complete that extra step for security purposes. We always look and shift staff around the district if we need to do so, and it can be done in a budget neutral way. And so at BCIS, at BUE, and BIS, we have a need for additional special education teachers, but they do not need to be new positions. These will be reallocated from special education teaching positions that are in other buildings. We have a very successful community mentor program, and the next 2 are reallocations to help support the expansion of that program. One is from my professional development budget line. Our community mentors are doing a lot of PD with faculty, staff, and students, and so that fits really well with that area. And then we are proposing to reallocate a campus monitor position to a full-time community mentor, which has a lot of overlap and similarities. And then our career and technical education at Barnstable High School, our innovation pathways and our technical pathways are thriving and could use some additional oversight. we are proposing, Principal Canetta is proposing reallocating what is a current vacant associate principal position into a CTE hub administrator. So it would be an associate principal level position with some slightly different responsibilities as it pertains to our pathways. And then we, as Chris said, had about $2 million that we were faced with in terms of a budget gap. And so the first things that we looked at is what are some of the mitigation strategies we might employ. And then looking at class sizes and caseloads, where might we reduce because we have low class size. About $280,000 was identified to shift accounting from the operating budget to revolving accounts. So for example, it would be allowable for custodians working during school lunch to be paid out of the food services revolving account versus the operating account. And so Chris went through all possible areas to try to maximize various sources of monies to alleviate some pressure on the operating budget. We have 2 bilingual paraprofessionals that we are proposing to reduce from the operating budget, but shift to Title III funding. These positions have already been approved in the FY25 Title III grant. We have not expended that money, so one of our mitigation strategies is to stretch out our grant funding, which we are allowed to spend over 20 months. And so we would shift these paraprofessional positions into Title III grant funding. And then the remaining positions on this page are proposed as reductions based on class size or caseload. So that includes a half-time special education teacher at BCIS, 2 social studies teachers at the high school, 1 science teacher, 1 English teacher, 1 world language teacher, and 1 math teacher. We are also seeing a slight enrollment decrease at Hyannis West. And we have a retirement there. And so we are looking to reduce a classroom teacher at Hyannis West. We are a little bit nervous. We sometimes see spikes of students enrolling over the summer. But district-wide, we're seeing fewer kindergartners and first graders in our K-3 schools. And then we had a student who required an LPN at the Early Learning Center, but that child has moved away. And so that position can be eliminated from the budget. And then this next slide is where we get into some more consequential reductions from the budget having to do with reduced services. We took a careful look at what we were carrying forward from ESSER and asking ourselves some tough questions about whether or not we needed to maintain those positions to the degree that we had. And we have some recommendations, reluctant recommendations in these areas. Reducing one of our administrative assistants who was brought on during ESSER when we had expanded an incredible amount of grant monies, reduce that position from full-time 12 months to half-time 10-month position. We have 2 administrative assistants at our Family and Community Engagement Center, and we are proposing to reduce 1 there, which is going to be a reduction of services for our families when they register, particularly in terms of receiving some help with medical support, because the person who is in the role does have kind of a medical assistant background. We are proposing to eliminate the peer mediator position and peer mediation program at the high school and shift more towards our community mentoring program. We have a reduction in Title I funding. And so we are at a point where in the past, we may have taken something that was grant funded and tried to absorb it in the operating budget, but with reduced Title I funds and reduced operating monies available to us, we don't feel like we can carry forward with the reading interventionist. And we are making a similarly difficult decision with the math interventionist at BUE to be proposed to reduce that service. We will still have 2 math interventionists and 2 reading interventionists at the school, but our student learning data would advocate for us keeping those positions. We're just in a spot where we have to make some reductions. I think a similar theme would be said for the reading interventionists and math interventionists at BIS. We do still have interventions happening there, but we just don't feel like we can continue to support them with the current budget. The math coach is proposed for a reduction. This is a person who works with staff more than they work with students, and would provide less support to staff, particularly as we think about bringing on a new math curriculum. We have a vacant PCTA position and one that will be vacated at High West, so we're proposing to reduce those from the budget. And then we have a administrative custodial supervisor that we are proposing to reduce from the budget and shifting those responsibilities of oversight to the deputy director of facilities and the director, with support from the principals. And then lastly, these are some deeper cuts that get at some really core services and also bring about some concerns related to equity across our buildings. But we are proposing the reduction of a social worker at Centerville, so that our 2 smallest K-3 schools, instead of having 2 counselors apiece, like our other elementary schools, would have 1.5 FTEs shared between the 2 of them. A reduction of an assistant principal at BCIS. Concerns about equity across K-3 there. As an innovation school, I do think that there may be some ways to mitigate this with some teacher leadership, but it does make us have to rethink that. And then 2 other bilingual paraprofessionals. We just feel like we can't continue to support this role. They're very, very valuable, but they are not mandated for us to implement English language education. Fortunately, I do think that we will be able to transfer these folks into different positions within the bargaining unit. So we will retain an important skill set in the district, but just in a slightly different role. We have 3 one-time expenses that we're proposing, which is a little bit of a difficult conversation that we're having because these come with some pretty large price tags. So we're looking at a reduction of about 16.5 positions, but I will note that these one-time expenses are proposed to be paid for out of savings and not out of kind of recurring revenues, and are really critical for making sure that we're maintaining some important investments going forward. The first one is a mold prevention and environmental health specialist. We recently signed a contract with Enviromed Services, and they are doing an amazing job with assessing indoor air quality and helping us develop a system to do this systematically and systemically district-wide across all of our buildings. And that would be for funds that could engage them in work for up to 3 years. The Teach Town curriculum is a curriculum that is aligned with our state's curriculum frameworks, and this would be to support students in our sub-separate special education programs. And then the last is a new mathematics curriculum. We have recently invested in a K-5 early literacy program. Ever since I came to Barnstable 3 years ago, one of the things I've been hearing about from teachers has been a need for a new math curriculum as well. And so this would be a review, a pilot process, and then adoption of new resources to implement a mathematics curriculum K-5. All of this, again, I'll just reiterate, would be out of savings and is not tied to kind of that recurring annual operating costs or recurring revenue. Chris, I'll turn it over to you.
Sure. These next two slides, I won't go into great detail on them, but we show every year the overall proposed budget. One broken down by cost center, which is by school building or by district-wide departments like administration, maintenance, and transportation. So those are all listed here. And you've got some historical context there to see changes year over year. And then the next slide is the budget broken down by DESE function. In DESE's core categories: administration, instruction, which is our largest cost center and expense, to people services.
So the next steps, the school committee will be voting on the budget on April 2nd, after which it gets submitted to Mark Ells and goes forward through the finance department for town council public budget hearings. We have one more slide that you would have seen in the presentation that we shared with you. One of the school committee members wanted to see an alternate budget that removed the mathematics curriculum and removed the cybersecurity key fobs. And so if the math curriculum were removed from the budget, the impact would be that the savings account balance would go from 9.8 million to 10.3 million with no impact on the operating budget or the levy. And if the key fobs were removed, our recommendation would be to add the 12,000 to out of district tuition, which we reduced to balance the budget. But that's not part of the recommended budget. That was just an alternate that one of the committee members wanted to see. And so with that, we'd be happy to take your questions.
So Sarah, this is Hector. There's a lot of discussion about decreases in funding sources, and I think you've done a great job managing those decreases and reallocating positions and costs appropriately. But I'm curious to know, are any of the cuts the result of what's going on in Washington with the education department? That's the first question. And secondly, if not now, in the future, do you expect the elimination of the education department, assuming it passes judicial review, will that impact funds coming into Barnstable either directly or indirectly through the state?
Yeah, great question. None of this is involving any of the recent news or the executive order working towards the elimination of the Department of Education. When I mentioned that there was a reduction in our Title I allocation, that happens every year. There's either an increase or a decreased allocation based on our population. And so we just are anticipating a reduced allocation that has nothing to do with anything more recently. What I'm hearing around recent news from the federal administration is that IDEA and Title I, which are our two largest federal grants, are not going to be affected, that they are going to sustain funding for students with special needs, and that they're going to sustain Title I funding, which is designed for students from low-income backgrounds. What remains to be seen is that there are other title funds like Title II, which goes towards teacher quality and professional development. Title III, which is for English language learners. Title IV, which is for technology and school safety. Those we don't have any news about. There's been no, kind of communication specifically. They have not been listed as some of the ones that will be sustained going forward. So I think that there's some potential risk there. But those are smaller in magnitude than IDEA and Title I, which I think I'd be very concerned about if we weren't going to get.
Okay, thanks. Other members of the committee, questions?
I see Betty has her hand raised.
Okay,
Yeah, thank you. Just what I was going to ask Hector's question, so that was good to hear that at least for the moment, it seems like we're on a steady course. Just wanted to say that as always, I find it pleasurable to listen to your presentations. They're so comprehensive, so detailed. You think of everything, and it's just, to me, probably, and this is why you get the lion's share from the budget, probably the most important responsibility of any government entity, from the federals on down, is to educate the citizens. And I think the Barnstable Public Schools are amazing. People have heard me say before, I have 4 kids. I keep them in the public schools. I think they're great. And, you know, I know there's challenges with English as a second language. And I know from experience talking to my kids, you know, other kids in the class help out. It's great. And I really admire you, sir. It's so impressive. And it's a pleasure. It not always is, but in this case it is. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Betty.
Hector, Jim Sproul. Sarah, could I ask a little bit about your mentor programs that you had, and then also hear a little bit on the technology, the pathway for technology? I just forgot the acronym. See, it was just below that. There's another program for technology pathway.
Oh, sure. Yes. So
CTE, thank you.
yeah, our community mentor program started last year, and it started out of a kind of an initiative and a roundtable group of community members, myself included, getting together and talking about violence reduction. There had been a very unfortunate shooting in Hyannis. It did involve teenagers. And we got together, it was July, and started to brainstorm ways in which we might be able to come together and make a difference. And a big component is representation, and the diversity among our student population and our student body is not shared and reflected in our faculty and staff. And that can create some barriers of communication, barriers of relating. And so we developed a community mentor program where we have adults in our community who have, they work with us part-time. They have other jobs in the community. They have leadership positions in the community. Many of them are connected with groups like the People of Action, if you know some of the members of People of Action, and working with a man named Lee Doherty, who is our youth development coordinator. They have developed a community mentoring program. They work with young people to kind of problem solve and troubleshoot before something bad happens. As a result, discipline has gone way down in our school. We have improved attendance, so they do a lot of outreach to students and families, and so our chronic absenteeism is going down. The number of students dropping out of school is going down, so we have a better retention rate. If you looked at any of the, if you looked at the last school committee meeting on March 19th, they came and presented. And so there's a video clip out there. I can certainly find it and send it along where they're highlighting the work that they're doing. It started at the high school and it has since expanded to the intermediate school. And actually they've been in all of our schools because now they're working with young people. About 70 of our high school students are becoming mentors themselves for younger children. And so it's something that's really kind of taking off and expanding. And so what we're trying to do is to strengthen the program and create a little bit more opportunity for its impact. The CTE Hub Administrator, so that's, I would say it's like an associate principal or like an assistant principal, but in charge of students and helping with some of the requirements of these pathways. So the technology, it's career and technology
Career and technology
education. Technology is just one component. We have like a computer science pathway, but we also have a very strong business pathway. We have an environmental science pathway. We have certified nursing assistant pathway. We have a hospitality pathway, culinary and hospitality. And so these pathways, they bring in a pretty significant amount of grant money from the state. There are reports that need to get written and submitted and updated to the Department of Education. Students are in internships, and so there's some oversight of those internships that's required. And so the CTE Hub Administrator, right now, these programs live in different departments, and that's okay. But this person would kind of, as an associate principal, kind of work with the teachers, work with the students as part of all of these pathways at sort of that assistant principal level position.
I applaud those 3 items. I find that the mentor programs, whether it's near peer or peer-to-peer, are extremely important in the high school environment. And certainly the CTE, the hub administrator, is critical. And I think that it's a Chapter 70 funding source for you as well.
Yep.
Sarah,
Sorry, go ahead.
just, you did an admirable job balancing the budget this year. As you look ahead to next year and the year after, things look worse. Any thoughts
Yes.
about what happens?
Yeah, Chris can probably chime in a little bit looking forward, but we are anticipating already a budget gap for FY27 and FY28. Some of the reductions from FY26 help going forward, but we want to rely less on savings in future years, but that does create some additional challenges. Chris, do you mind chiming in a little bit about FY27 and FY28's forecast?
Sure. Yep. So as Sarah mentioned, we're already looking at a gap for next year. Right now it's $1.2 million. So, we'll continue to think on how we can pare that back, and, we'll start in earnest in the fall on building that budget. FY28 is a little interesting in that right now we can actually close that gap, but it would require us to give no cost of living increase to school department staff. So they'd all have to take a 0 in FY28 if everything stayed the same. So that's a broader conversation that needs to happen with the town and the town staff on what that looks like. So that's one variable for FY28. The other variable right now for us in FY28 is our bus contract will be up. And that's been locked in for 10 years at favorable terms for us. And we anticipate that, we will see a larger than anticipated increase, at least what we have budgeted for in FY28. So, those are the 2 big pieces that we're looking at for 28. So I don't think next year is insurmountable, but it is disconcerting when you look out years and, you're already in the red, right? So there's something structural there that needs to be addressed.
Thank you.
Sarah, I've got to, first of all, I applaud you for the overview that you presented, the conditions that you are encountering with the ESSER and the expenses and the Chapter 70 and all of that, and what your priorities are, and the very careful way of putting together that budget. The question I have is about the ELL and ED students. For a number of years, we saw a very great increase in their enrollment, which required more staff positions. What is the status of that now?
We are seeing additional ELL students. We're approximately 25% across the district. It is not increasing as rapidly as it had been, but our enrollment is sustained by a lot of students whose first language is not English. Many of the requests that came in from our department sites were to support English language learners. If we had been able to fill those positions, we would have reduced caseloads and class sizes if we had been able to support them. So I think we're sustained by our English language learners in terms of our enrollment. The increase has slowed a bit. It's not as dramatic as it had been in previous years. And we're, I think, around 25% ELs.
You're about 25% EL?
Yes.
Thank you.
Chris Lauzon, you have at least 2, if not 3 kids in the school system. Do you have any questions? You're an educated consumer, I presume.
I do have 3 kids in the school system, but no, I think I'm good at the moment. So I appreciate all the hard work on the budget from Sarah, Chris, everyone else.
Thank you.
Well, I think it's an excellent presentation. Before I move us along, Jeremy, did you have something you wanted to say?
Yeah, certainly as one who both has a child in district and also works in district, I'd say 2 weeks ago, tough to see, a reallocation, but it's a person you know or a person you hired. But also tough to see the financial state from this position of saying, we have reduced funding, ESSER disappeared. And I think sometimes it's frustrating looking at ESSER funding. Certainly, I was on the finance committee in Sandwich, and they made a concerted effort not to spend it on positions because they knew it would disappear. So I think that certainly that was before Sarah came on. But I think disappointing that, we knew this was going to happen. And I guess what has been presented here, I think makes sense. There's hard, and I think when it comes to funding and budgets, it could be nitpicky, I suppose. But I think what has been presented is looking at data of what's supporting it. And I think, Sarah, you mentioned that. I think for me, my challenge, and I know Jim mentioned it, the CTE hub administrator, this seems like it's nice. I certainly know the people that are taking on these positions. I'm not sure I would necessarily characterize it as essential. It seems like it'll be helpful. But when you're presenting a budget with staff reductions, having an administrator that would be nice feels harder to sell. And I think going off of the, what does the data show? I think the community mentors are excellent, but it's hard to also see positions that are not being evaluated as the same as perhaps a math interventionist. And certainly my child has certainly benefited from that position. So seeing that go, that, as you said, the data supports them being there. And then there's positions that aren't necessarily data support, it's more gut support. I think that's what makes it harder to sell or to buy. I think many of these other positions, all your arguments make sense, but those ones in particular, I find just harder to stomach. But going back to the other point of looking ahead, there is a lot, and looking at the percentage of money allocated from communities on the Cape and Barnstable being less, it seems like we as a town need to do better at prioritizing the schools, because we are having funding challenges. And if we want these schools to cease reductions, the town needs to really think about how we can support them better. And if we're in the red in the next couple of years and we're already in the red, we got to figure out a way to work out of that. So I think for a town, we really need to consider a way to move forward so we can help these schools out and get them the funding that they need.
So Jeremy, following up that question, so does that imply that the budget split increases from 60% to some higher number?
I mean, I'm not the maths person or the numbers person, but it seems from my seat here that unless we're looking at continued reductions in staffing, And if as mentioned today, with school choice, like we have a need to invest in the schools. And if not, then we're going to be seeing reductions. And I don't think anyone in the community wants that, despite the fact we also don't want to spend more money.
Is there anything sacrosanct about 60/40? Is that a standard split across communities across the Cape? Mark Milne, maybe you would have a thought there?
No, it's not standard across the Cape. Every community is different. Every community will decide in their own way how they will allocate the growth in new revenue sources between operations. And it may not be done between school and municipal operations and the neighboring towns. They may look at it from a completely different perspective. So there's no standard formula that any one community follows.
Sarah, I think you said the total FTE reductions were 16.5, if I got that right. What were the FTE losses in the prior fiscal year 2025? Do you happen to recall?
I think it was, I don't have the exact number. We added a number of positions, and then we reduced some as well. So I think it was a small number last year. This number is larger in magnitude of a net change. And if I can take this opportunity to jump in, the CTE hub administrator is a reallocation of a current position, so it's not a new ad. So I don't want that to be potentially like it's been reallocated from a current associate principal position. So the net is 16.5 less. And last year it was, we could crunch that number for you and get back to you, but it was smaller.
Yeah, I don't need the exact number. Just curious if this year's increase was a material number.
Yeah, it is. Can I jump in and add one other detail?
Please.
Because I do want to sort of emphasize this idea that we're looking at all possible strategies to mitigate the gap. And the school committee is looking at increasing fees for certain services. So that would be bus fees, increasing the fees to renters, and then food services would remain the same, but athletic, and we have free school lunch, but there are costs for second lunches and a la carte items that'll all remain the same. But they are also looking at an incremental fee for athletics and sports.
I see Chris Clark is on the call. Chris, I don't know if you have any comments you want to make as a town councilor who's going to be looking at this proposed budget.
Thank you very much, Hector, for asking. No, I'm happy to hear your evaluation. I have great respect for this committee. I don't know if it would help communicate some of Hector's, what do I want to say, perspective is to maybe tell us, since Sarah was here, how many positions were lost over the last 3 years that you're responsible for. Does that make sense? A trend?
It could be, an interesting data point. Yep. Because that's, losing positions is hard in any organization, never mind a school system.
I think what you would see is an increase in positions, particularly through COVID and the ESSER years, and then a small decrease last year and then a bigger one this year.
Yeah.
Yeah, if I may, Hector, if you can go back to page 68 of the operating budget book from fiscal year 25, and there's a personnel table by department in there. And that'll show a 10-year trend of positions for all departments. And it was like Sarah said, it was a small reduction in personnel of fiscal year 25, just over 8 positions. But the years before that, there were some pretty significant increases, mainly due to those ESSER funds.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Director Milne, would it be of any use for perspective for us to look at the 15 Cape Towns and see what the budget split is, or is that not a apples to apples?
Yeah, I wouldn't recommend going there because every community is unique, right? I mean, it really depends on the particular circumstances in your community. For example, you know, what sandwiches EL population and ED population compared to Barnstable's? I'm sure Barnstable's is much higher, which is going to create a different classroom environment and needs to educate those children. So I don't think you can just look at what the other communities are doing for splits. It's not going to give you enough information.
Thank you.
Mark, it's probably the case that Barnstable has the highest ELL percentage of students of any town on the Cape.
Yeah, I mean, Superintendent Ahern might know that, probably.
Yeah, I think it would be fair to say it's highest in Barnstable. Dennis Yarmouth is increasing, but we're greater than them.
How about Falmouth?
I don't know off the top of my head.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
That might be an interesting stat that shows the burden that Barnstable carries financially to address these needs.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Sarah, can
All
I
right.
ask, can I
Oh.
ask a couple questions, Sarah?
Please.
Chris King, a great presentation. Thank you very much. I'm interested in the mathematics curriculum. What are your expectations with the new curriculum? And obviously, it's a multi-year event where it takes time to percolate through the student body. But what do you see as the long-term expectations with the new curriculum?
Sure. So I can maybe talk about some short-term and long-term expectations. One, in the short term would be some more kind of consistency across classrooms in terms of the instruction that students are getting within a grade level and then from grade to grade, that it's, sort of instructionally better sequenced, that the language that's being used is more accessible to students and more precise in terms of mathematics. And then, we have a lot of our own assessments. One of the assessments that we use is the STAR assessment, but there are others as well for various mathematical units. But we're going to be looking at student learning and student learning outcomes, and reducing the number of students identified on our STAR assessments that need intervention. Increasing the number of students who are meeting kind of those grade level benchmarks on those assessments. I think longer term, there would also be some improved MCAS scores in terms of the mathematic achievement on MCAS, particularly in the grades where the new curriculum is being implemented. We are also doing a math review right now, grades 6 through 12. Kids being kids, I will say that I don't, now that MCAS doesn't count for graduation, I don't know that our students are going to be taking it with as much seriousness as they have in the past. But, we would like to see improved student learning. That's one measure. So those are some of the things that we would expect to see.
Thank you. And is there community involvement with the ELL? In other words, you have students that need English learning support. Is there community involvement with their parents in helping that out?
Yeah, so in terms of the parent groups, we have what's called an LPAC, so our English Language Parent Advisory Council, and that is probably in its third year, I would say, and it's run by our director. It's supported by our director of English learners. It's actually run by parents, and that LPAC is a wonderful community organization that allows families to get together, become more knowledgeable about the curriculum and instruction that students are experiencing, and all of the materials, both for the LPAC as well as in other ways for the school department, are translated in multiple languages for parent engagement. Our new literacy curriculum has a lot of resources that go home to families, and we've been translating those if we don't have them already translated, so that parents can support their children in the literacy efforts. So I think there's a lot of parent engagement, and we have family liaisons as well, who speak Portuguese and speak Spanish and are part of our community. And so I think that also really helps create kind of a welcoming atmosphere.
Right. Thank you. Yeah, that was just a thought I was thinking of. And then lastly is poor North Andover has their school budget has been blown out and gotten into the press where they're talking about all the difficulties that North Andover is having with their school budget. Are you aware, or do you know what mistakes they've made and what things we should look out for?
So I would have to, I just Googled it. I do keep tabs on lots of things that are happening across the state. But I had some stuff happen in my family over the weekend, so I've been maybe a little under a rock, and not 100% sure of what's going on there. But I'm just seeing that there's some devastating job cuts. MASC does put out things that are happening in different communities with the FY26 budget. I did see that they were having some student walkouts in protest of various cuts. And I'd have to do a little bit more digging to see if there's any lessons to learn.
Yeah, that was the only point was, are there mistakes that they've made, and are there lessons that we could learn here?
Yeah, I mean, we do keep tabs of what's happening in other districts. There are some districts that are going for overrides. I think an override in Duxbury just failed by less than 200 votes. I saw that come up over the weekend. There's some restructuring of districts that's happening. Some school closures are happening. So, kind of back to an earlier point, that there's some statewide issues that are happening that are making budgets really challenging.
Okay, well, thank you. I didn't mean to bring up North Andover if you haven't had a chance to look at it, but
That's okay.
But
Thank you.
Thank you for your review. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Any other comments from the committee? If not, I'd like to thank Sarah and Chris for their time and diligent preparation. Sarah, if you could circulate that slide deck to Mark, who can send it around to the group of us, that would be great.
Sure, I can do that.
And thank you, and good luck at the school committee and at town council upcoming.
Thank you. Thank you for all your questions and interest and support.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
All right, moving on to the next item. Jim Sproul, Chuck, and Jeremy have been hard at work on the CIP subcommittee report. And they want to, well, Chuck isn't here, but Jeremy and Jim want to take some time to walk us through their report. I hope everybody's had a chance to read it. And my understanding is that we want to put their report to a vote of the committee tonight. So Jim, go ahead, take it off.
Thank you very much. Mark, I'm going to share my screen if I could.
Yep, you should be able to. Yep.
So can everyone see this okay?
Yes.
Yeah.
So to paraphrase Hector, we have been hard at work for the last month and a half and have really had excellent meetings, exchange of ideas, and thoughts on how to approach the FY26 to 30 capital improvement report. It's really been a fun project. Jeremy, who is new to the role, chipped right in, and I can't thank him enough for everything that he added with respects to the school. And we started off by making assignments. Chuck and I, of course, Chuck specifically had a lot more experience in this than I, but we were able to, all the three of us, team up and put together this report. I'm taking a different approach this year. I think I've heard and would have expected all of the committee members to have reviewed the report. I think the shared drive, in my opinion, works very well. It's a little clunky, but certainly allows us to be able to post documents, have them reviewed, had the edits looked at, agreed to, and be able to, I think in probably 4 meetings, publish a report, which was, I think, a pretty significant event for us. So again, I just bear with me as we go through this as a new project. Hopefully it's something we can take a look at in the future, but it does make the bold assumption that we have read the report. So the purpose of the presentation tonight is that we want to review the overall, we've been making an announcement that we have reviewed the CIP subcommittee recommendations presented to us by the town manager. We're going to focus on this report in 3 specific areas: the general fund, schools, and CWMP. However, in our report, you will read, as always, we covered all the major funding sources: enterprise, general fund, school, and CWMP, and posted for you our review and opinions. Certainly, enough cannot be said about the importance of collaboration. We experienced it here this evening, but I really, truly want to thank Mark and his staff, Gareth and Chris Dooley, all their help in taking a look at helping us frame ideas and concepts, reviewing numbers. And this is all stuff that we have to put in the way of their day job. So I can only tell you we're extremely appreciative. Also with the work of Sarah Ahern and Dan Santos and many others. I guess it's just a joy. I think I heard Betty talk about a little bit earlier about the professionalism and the competency in our organization. And it really comes through. And when we hear from them, learn from them, and we'll present to you in our report. And then when we're done tonight, we're going to be asking for your approval of that report so that we can promptly submit it to the town manager, hopefully schedule a review session with the town manager before it goes to town council. But if that's not possible, we will submit it to the town manager and town council on the 4th. So the general fund highlights, with Chuck not being here, I will do the best that I can, but the projects, the general fund projects, we believe are essential to preserving and maintaining town assets. It's really the vehicle in which every project within the town is identified, reviewed, prioritized, submitted, reviewed again, recommended. The process itself is extremely arduous. And certainly if I had one wish, if there's only way we could make some lighten the load of all our department heads that have to go through that, this might be one particular area. Roads for the general fund continue to be the largest category of submission, DPW submissions. And additionally, the rising climate issues, rising sea levels, coastal storms, all require investments in our docks, marinas, and waterfront infrastructure that again requires funding that must be tracked and identified and managed. Another topic we spent a lot of time on is bridge repairs. We have Osterville bridge repairs, etc. There's a lot of identified maintenance and repair work, as well as new construction on bridges. And then, as always, as the CWMP provides, and in other areas throughout the town, our aging infrastructure is of critical nature.
All right, I spent some time, as always, thinking about schools. And certainly the schools they have a lot. They have a lot of needs. And this year, the recommended projects, there were 17 of them. And if we kind of focused the areas, safety, accessibility, HVAC, tech, and then arts and athletics. So really a push to maintain the quality of our infrastructure, as well as understanding how that infrastructure can support student needs and really make it a place that's accessible for our students. The BIHS, BIS, and BUE were kind of the three main focal points for this year's spending. Certainly BUE, we know, was in the news this year with the mold issues. So we were glad that certainly investment was getting put towards BUE. And as we believe that's kind of maybe of the priorities for the community when it comes to the most visible issues. And we certainly know BHS is the biggest school. So that PAC upgrade, the Performing Arts Center, is incredibly used. It's the biggest performance space on Cape Cod. So we were happy to see that money was getting put towards that. Now, we also spent a lot of time talking about this K-3 school consolidation. So in the report, hopefully you have read it, at the end, there's some questions that we just want town council to consider about this project. Certainly, Betty was in some of those meetings and had some questions, and we were able to really think about what town council wants. And hopefully the report, and Jim's done such an amazing job putting this together and being our sensei to guide the project. And we hope that this is going to really be a report when we present it, when they have it in hand. That's something that town council finds useful. And I think that's ultimately all of our goals here, is to be useful in a way and not just spinning wheels for the sake of it. So that one of thinking, is this really a project that we want to consider when it comes to the needs of the town? When are students leaving for school choice? Are there other options we can explore? What other issues are going to come up if we have some other overrides in the future around CWMP? And even just, what happens to those, if we're shutting down 2 schools, what happens to those parcels of land? So we know that there's a lot of questions, and hopefully what we put in the report brings up some of those that helps town council wrap their heads around something that is pretty large. And then I'll touch on, or Jim can touch on at the end, another suggestion we had around the schools.
So for CWMP, again, most of us are extremely familiar with this topic. Tom did an excellent report on the matter on financing, and Mark has done incredible presentations on the same topic as well. So it's a topic that is near and dear to us. In FY26, the recommended budget was 66 million, and over the next 5 years, it'll increase to 332 million. The goals stand the same. They're rock solid, community supported: nitrogen reduction, water quality protection, sewer expansion. The funding has been identified: state revolving fund loans, grants, water protection, user fees. There's a range of them, which we have discussed in the past. And I just think that our guidance to you is that the financial controls and implementation plans and the oversight provided by the finance department is significant. However, with the debt service rising, it was 0.6 million in 2024. It's now, by FY30, it will be 10.9. All we're asking, I think, is that we should continually review all avenues of funding, projects, stability, and then advocate for change where it's required. So at this point, there we get to what are the meat of the topic. What we would like to share with you is some of the key takeaways that we took from this 2-month project and our report that's in front of you. Clearly, the town has demonstrated prudent financial management and strategic planning. It's really, to me, as a novice and a community member and a citizen of the town, I feel very secure in the fact that we have competent people across all key areas of the town of Barnstable municipal government. So I think that's a real strong plus for all of us to feel safe and secure as we move forward. We had a long, you'll see this in our first graph on the report. It's a 10-year history of funding submissions. We spent a lot of time on that graph because we thought it tracked either increases and decreases, and typically they were significant, of submissions for capital improvement. What we found in talking it out through with Mark, and Mark, feel free if I paraphrase incorrectly, is that we're measuring a topic which is a moving target. We're measuring submissions from one year to the next, when in actuality, the expenditures or may not be in the year it was appropriated, which could allow for double counting of a project. So if something was approved and it's showing up, submitted and showing up in 2026 as a project, and something happens and that let's say it's appropriated, but it doesn't start until 2027, that project theoretically gets double counted. And I think it's important that we wrap our heads around this to see if there's a better tool to manage our expenditures at a very high level over a long period of time. Almost like when I saw the school's budget versus actual, it's something of that nature, which is, submitted versus appropriated, or something of that nature. And Mark, if you want to chime in at this point, just for clarification.
Yeah, thank you, Jim. So yeah, what we were thinking about was we think in a future report it would be helpful, or at least maybe not in the report, but at least take a look at this. Let's look at submissions over a 10-year period and what was appropriated over that same 10-year period in an attempt to try to measure whether or not we're increasing our unfunded liability or decreasing it. So I think that's where we're trying to go, is to see if, because of our limited funding available for the capital program, and now with the introduction of the CWMP, the introduction of a new comprehensive school facility program, I think what we're going to see is our unfunded obligation or our unfunded liability for infrastructure is growing.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. And coupled with that, as we've already mentioned, the CWMP is a big component of that. But the community has decided and that it's environmentally and important to our public health, and we will continue along that project. General fund, again, the projects are truly critical. If anything, we wished that there was more funding to spend or be spent. There are a range of projects that are there that did not make the list that we feel were vitally important. However, respect the town manager's recommendations. And then the school CIP planning efforts, which we have witnessed through Doug and Sarah, are immediate as far as actions that need to be required. And they have a range of long-term facility needs that we think are also important. And Jeremy, I think at this point, I will turn this over to you.
Yeah, and I think even today, Sarah's presentation brought it even more into importance. We're looking at certainly kind of two ideas when it comes to the schools and their facilities. So there's first this question around a new construction, which would cost, their estimate is 43.6 million. That's after funding from the state, and then certainly looking at repairs. So there's the question about the cost effectiveness. Can we just update one school, consolidate two into one? I think there's a lot of questions around the decision of moving forward or thinking about moving forward with a new school building that we want to raise to town council. But also just recognizing no matter what happens, there's an enormous amount of money that the schools require over the next 10 years. I think the number is above $220 million. And this is our third facilities director, and we think Doug's presented well. He's been great in these meetings, but we know that it's an overwhelming job. Just tonight saying, we're reducing the custodial supervisor, and that duty would fall upon the assistant and the facilities director. So one of the things that we got to talking about was this idea of how do we better support the schools. And we know the town has amazing staff when it comes to our buildings. So can we thinking, and it seems talking to in conversations, this has been brought up already by town council in previous years of would it make sense to have a more centralized buildings supervisor that isn't just the schools? And we have concerns because certainly money could get allocated by the town, but if we have all these projects going on with the schools, is all of that allocation is going to get spent, overseen? So we know that it's a huge need, and thinking creatively of how we can help support the schools. And is that rethinking the way that we as a town kind of look at facilities instead of these two very separate silos of town municipal facilities and school facilities? Is there a way we can have them work together? And that's certainly a question that we want to bring up to town council because we think it's worthy of conversation. And if they already have brought it up, it might be helpful for us to lend support to their already discussed idea.
And then how about the enrollment and the conversation on enrollment?
Yeah, so certainly one of the arguments that was presented by school committee around this idea of a new school is that idea of competitiveness. If you look at the data, the students are leaving after grades 5 and 8 the most. This is when schools are available. There aren't a lot of K-3 schools that students have as another option. And frankly, as a parent in the district, K-3 have great reviews. Like parents are really pleased with them. So I'm not sure that argument, which seems to be a central argument around this, necessarily has the support from the data, which I think then brings up, all right, if that's not necessarily the main driver of students leaving, what other arguments can there be? And we're not saying that there aren't great arguments, but certainly we want to point out some other of the discrepancies with these arguments.
There's two more. So part of the other, in listening to the school committee meetings, is that talking about the potential debt overrides, is going to be a topic of extreme interest. I'm sure a very heated one. And I think the more we talk about what the options are and what the capabilities and possibilities are, the better off we'll be in the long run. Then just wanted to paraphrase what Jeremy just spoke about, is that this whole idea, we have this massive facilities and maintenance programs within the town in two separate organizations. And in listening to the school present their capital needs, it was obvious that Doug was in no fault of his own. He's brand new. So he's coming at this from a whole different angle, trying to come up to speed, working with a $90 million proposed capital improvement plan. It's a lot, and that's only the tip of the iceberg. That's only the side that we see. Never mind from the back end, the execution, the engineering that goes on behind the proposals, the management, the vendor selections, all those tasks would have to all be accomplished under that two-person organization, a director and an assistant. And we just like to explore different ideas as to how, the town's facilities and maintenance could be managed in a more cost-effective manner, in a more equitable manner as well. So with your permission, that would be part of our recommendations to the town council through the town manager when we meet in the next couple of weeks. So with that, what we're asking for is after this presentation, your guidance and hopefully review and approval of our committee report. We would like to take that committee report and then sit with the town manager and review that with him to make sure he's comfortable with it, and then present to we're targeting April 17th for a presentation similar to this to the town council. And with that, we can open it up for questions.
Well, I'll jump in. Jim and Jeremy and Chuck, you did an outstanding job in your analysis of the details of the various submissions. But I think the most important and relevant part of your report are your comments and your recommendations, your discussion of the debt service, and the conclusions and recommendations that you made, because I think they're very, very thoughtful. They're looking ahead. They address the challenges, and I think this will be invaluable to both the town manager and the town council. Excellent job.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I agree too. I do have one question, Mark. Have you reviewed the report, and are you comfortable that it's factually accurate?
Yes, I have. Yes, I'm comfortable with that.
That's a great point, Tom. And from a review perspective, Hector has reviewed it, Mark has reviewed it, and then the three of us. So it's being presented to you with those approvals.
Yeah, and Gareth helped out with a lot of the numbers, Tom. I think at Jim and Chuck and Jeremy's requests. So I was going to ask the same question, Mark. You're quite sure that the numbers are accurate and consistent with what's in the 400-page book?
And actually, Chris Dooley from the school side has reviewed it. And as Hector just mentioned, Gareth has also reviewed it.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I would just echo what several of you, notably Lillian, have said. I think it's a excellent job. You shortened it considerably from last year, and I think in your presentation to town council, Jim and Jeremy, I would focus your comments on the questions, comments, and recommendations, particularly around the facilities, the school buildings, and how they're managed vis-a-vis the town's other infrastructure, and is there a better way? So that's I think that was a great contribution, something I hadn't really thought about before.
And in all honesty, it's we're coming from a point of view which we want to just help. I mean, the school has so much to do, and maybe we're just using this as a jumping off point, Hector, to say let's put a stake in the ground and see if we can't share some ideas with the town manager and town council, and they might go, good idea, let's see what happens. Or we've tried, this has been tried before, but not. It just seemed to not go anywhere. We just like to dig it back up again, see if it.
Yeah,
if it'll
I'd
stick.
be curious, since Mark's been around for 20 years. Mark, is the consolidation of facilities management, is this a topic that's been broached before? And if so, what happened? Or perhaps Lillian could weigh in as well.
Yeah, it's not to the level of school committee and town council interaction where they got together to meet to talk about it, but internally it has been discussed, and a couple of challenges that are very difficult to overcome. One being the union issues. You got different collective bargaining units that the school facilities maintenance crew belongs to in the towns. And so if we were to consolidate, most likely what would happen is all of the positions would have to be upgraded to that level of pay that is being paid to those that are to the group that's paying the higher wage. So that creates a fiscal challenge. And secondly is, that as evidenced by, the condition of our school facilities, there's been there's been a lack of funding in that particular area as part of the school's operating budget. However, they have made some really good strides in the recent years to try to improve upon that. But when the DPW takes a look at it from their perspective, they say, well, you want to, we can't inherit a group of assets that the existing funding that is provided to maintain is currently insufficient. And so, to do it and to do it well would require significant additional resources to make that happen. And that comes at the expense of everything else that we do. Not saying it shouldn't be looked at again. Certainly with the changes that have been made, especially on the school side over the past few years, we can certainly have that conversation again.
Okay. Other comments, questions on the report?
Yeah, I do. I think this report's important challenge is the addressing of the school facilities that will be needed in the future, because what it does is, and it makes the town council aware that there are two major capital projects that are be forthcoming in the future. You've got the school facilities and you've got the CWMP. And if we double dip into the debt exclusions, it's a very difficult decision that the town council will have to make. So I think that this report points out the critical nature of considering the future of the facilities and what Barnstable Schools has to offer compared with the other schools on the Cape. So I think that's a critical point that you all make. It should be a very interesting discussion with the town manager.
Yeah, yeah. Well, if there are no more comments, I'd like to entertain a motion.
I've
Go
got
ahead.
just one question, Hector.
Sure. Mhm.
At next week's council meeting, April 3rd,
Yeah.
we will be reading in the capital appropriation orders for the first read, referring them all to April 17th, where we'll begin the public hearings. And as Jim indicated tonight, that's when they anticipate to make a presentation to the town council on their report. I will be making a presentation next Thursday night on the capital plan in what's included in it, and in advance of those public hearings beginning on the 17th. So last year we did that report to the council, that presentation to the council at the same meeting, both myself and CPAC. And I don't know if it's a possibility, if you'll be ready or not, to perhaps join me in that presentation next week and bring your presentation at the same time. But if not, if you're not ready, we can certainly push it to the 17th if that would work better for you. But I just wanted to throw that out there. That's how we did it last year.
The way we ran the last year's. So if that means just putting some more effort into it to get it done, and you present and we present. Is that what is the?
Yeah.
That would be a great opportunity. And I'll
I
check.
mean, if you
Chuck.
wanted to just send me your slide deck from tonight, after maybe taking one more look at it, if you're comfortable with it, just send it to me. I can add those slides to the end of my presentation and turn it right over to you next week if that works.
Yeah, I wanted to make it a little fancier, not much, but
Mhm.
just do a little, maybe do some flying animation, seagull, sewer pumps, something like that.
Yeah.
Jim or Jeremy, does either of you have a handle on Chuck's schedule for next week? I think he said he wasn't available on the 17th.
17th, he wasn't available. I don't know. I'll send him an email as soon as we're done here.
Yeah, because it'd be great if he could make himself available, even if only by Zoom.
Well, there's a slot there for you, Hector, if you want to take it.
I'll be the master of ceremonies. I'll introduce you guys to make your presentation. But
None of you
eh,
left it.
but no, seriously, Jim, I'm available to do whatever
Okay.
you like. Let's find out what Chuck's availability is,
We'll do.
and then give me a call and we can discuss.
My thought visualization of what we would do would be take that tabletop that sits next to the podium, and the
Yeah.
three of us will sit there.
Yeah.
It might be easier rather than have somebody stand up and sit down, stand up.
Yeah,
We'll,
that's fine. I think that would work well. And
okay.
if Chuck's
Thank you.
available, in theory, I could be a fourth, but not necessary. We'll sort it out once we learn what Chuck's availability is for next April 3rd, Thursday, April 3rd.
Sounds great, Hector. Thank you.
Mr.
all
Chair,
right.
I think you were looking for a motion to approve.
Yes.
I'm so move.
I'll second it.
I second it. Or third it.
And if there's no more discussion, Chris Lazon, would you call the roll, please?
Hector,
Yes, I approve it.
Lillian,
Yes.
Jim,
Yes.
Tom,
Yes.
Jeremy,
Yes.
Chris King,
Yes.
and I'm a yes, so it's unanimous.
Awesome.
Good
Well,
work,
great work.
guys.
Thank you,
Great work.
guys.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Thank you very much.
All
So-
right.
Actually, just two things before we
Yeah.
go. Jim, I
Yeah.
just sent you the PowerPoint presentation draft that I put together for next Thursday night. If you wanted to take a look at that,
Okay.
it gives you the format that I'm using, the template, and then if you wanted to add your slides to that,
Okay.
that might work. If you have any trouble with that, just let me know. I can do it, help assist you with that. And secondly, I'll try to set up a meeting with the town manager for the subcommittee to review the report prior to next Thursday night, if I can find the time. It's coordinating 4 schedules, or 5 schedules. So let me know if you'd like to do that.
All right. Mark, any communications from the staff side that we haven't covered tonight yet?
No, Mr. Chairman, I do not have any.
All right. And I don't have any matters to roll out. So if there are no more questions, I'll take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Hello.
Okay, second.
Yep.
Chris Lazon, call the roll, please.
Hector,
Yes.
Lillian,
Yes.
Jim,
Yes.
Tom,
Yes.
Jeremy,
Yes.
Chris King,
Yes.
and I'm a yes, so that's a
Great.
wrap.